So Lecture 6, this video is all about analysis, which is actually all about finding patterns in your data. I think it's the fun bit, but maybe I've got a perverted idea of what fun is.
Shut up and sit down.
So this week, how to identify patterns in your data. Now, from this lecture and from the reading for this week being week 9, you'll learn how to define a theme. And here we're talking about themes as defined by Braun and Clark's approach to thematic analysis. And you'll learn that you should not use frequency data or summarizing, and why this is one of the greatest sins of qualitative analysis. And you'll find out about the usefulness of visual maps to organize your codes and themes, and you'll learn how to review your themes. So these are our 6 phases of thematic analysis, and we're going to be looking at phases 4 and 5. So developing our themes. This comes after we've done our coding. And here in phase 4, we start to focus on themes. This is kind of broadening out of our analysis. You know, we're joining together our codes into bigger and broader potential themes.
You gotta think big picture.
Another way of thinking about this is combining, clustering, or collapsing codes together into bigger or more meaningful patterns. Now, the difference between a code and a theme is that a code captures one idea and a theme is something that has a central organizing concept that tells us something meaningful about a group of codes. So another way of thinking about it is that it captures something important about the data that relates to the research question.
I took it upon myself to go out and try to capture it on video.
And it represents a pattern in our data. Now, this could be a pattern in relation to its prevalence. You know, the pattern is in relation to where that theme occurs in our data. It could be across questions, across participants, and so on. But the pattern could also be in relation to its meaningfulness, irrespective of where it occurs in our data or whether it's prevalent at all. You know, it could be a theme that is inferred by us.
I can't see it, but I know it's in there.
So, a central organizing concept. What the heck's that? Well, one way of thinking about it is as a core idea or concept that underpins a theme. So you could think of it as a shared meaning, a meaning that is shared by several codes. It could also be something that unites data. So without the theme, the codes don't seem to connect. And themes can also be the thing that helps us tell a story about the data. So themes are interpretative. They are more abstract than codes and are more about the implicit meaning in the data. Now, to help you understand what something is, it can sometimes be useful thinking about what something isn't, except when it comes to politics, where political broadcasts around election time typically tell you why you shouldn't be voting for an alternative party than them. They don't tell you why you should vote for them. They just say, don't vote for the other lot. Anyway, that withstanding, I am going to tell you what themes aren't. So a theme is not, and I mean most definitely is not, a summary of what a person said. So if you start off a theme with the sentence, some people said, blah, 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 then you know you are heading down the wrong track.
Some people count, some people don't.
It's also not a summary of the data or the answers that people give us to our questions. And we don't say anything about frequencies. You should never be saying that a theme occurred X amount of times or that 8 out of 10 participants talked about the theme. Now let's talk a bit more about this problem of summarizing and citing frequencies, because these are the 2 most common errors that people new to qualitative research make.
And I've been right all along. You are an idiot.
And they're the ones that you might be at greatest risk of making. Now, we do use prevalence, so we might define a theme on the basis that it stretches across our data, across participants, across questions, and so on. So that's a sort of measure of its occurrence, but we shouldn't measure that prevalence quantitatively or anything that alludes to a quantitative measure. So you shouldn't say, shouldn't use percentages, but you don't use terms like this was the most prevalent theme or this theme occurred a lot. You know, because what you're doing there is you're invoking a more than or less than concept, which again is a quantitative form of measuring something.
Doing less is doing more.
Now, why do we avoid quantitative measures of prevalence? Is it just because we hate numbers? Well, no. It's because our data is collected through qualitative methods, and it tends to be, because of that, fluid, flexible, and interactive. We don't standardize our methods. Each of our interviews will be run differently. We ask different questions in different ways of our participants. So the data that we generate from each participant is often quite different. And that's largely, not only, but largely because each interview runs differently. So the methods are not systematic. So you can't say something like 8 out of 10 participants discussed X as a way of imbuing meaning to X, you know, as a theme, because it may not be that the other 2 participants didn't think X was relevant. They might just not have got around to discussing it or weren't given the opportunity to discuss it because our questions didn't get to that issue.
I don't know. No one's ever asked me that question.
So it's not a survey, it's not a systematic procedure that's being used, so we can't use any form of quantitative analysis on our data. Now, the second reason for us avoiding frequencies is that themes are ways of connecting codes. You know, we're not linking them statistically, but on the basis of their meaning. So a code may appear only once in our data, but that's fine. It can still link to a theme. It has as much right to be linked to a theme as a code that's cited 100 times in our data. So themes do not indicate frequency of codes, but represent the meaning between codes. So you're citing the frequency of themes, if you do that, it's actually meaningless.
These numbers mean nothing to me.
Now, why not summarize? Why shouldn't we summarize our data as a form of analysis? Well, using frequencies is a form of summarizing data. So summarizing data is problematic for the same reason. Commonly, new researchers or incompetent researchers will say something like 4 participants said X and 3 participants said Y as a way of summarizing their themes. But if you think about it, that tells us nothing really, because our data is not collected quantitatively, i.e. systematically. So it's the same argument as before. Themes are not summaries of our data. They're telling us something about the meaning of our data. It explains our data. So stay away from quantitative forms of analysis, of summarizing, and don't use frequencies when you're reporting on your analysis. So you can't use these things.
Just warning us to stay clear.
So what the bloomin' heck do you cite? What do you do? Well, what you're after is the deep meaning behind your data, and you get to that deep meaning by finding those themes that can best explain the underpinning ideas in your data. Now, there's no quick way to get to this. You have to go through that process of reading and rereading and organizing your codes, then reorganizing them.
How are you organized?
And eventually, you'll start to see the patterns emerge. And after a while, you'll find the patterns stick. You know, they're solid. You get that sense that your themes really do reflect what's going on in your data.
Yes, it all makes sense now.
So we have a process we go through when developing our themes. One, what we're looking for is similarity or overlap between our codes. So we ask ourselves, what are the topics or issues which several or more codes relate to? Or we can frame that a bit differently and go back to that idea of semantic and latent meaning. So do some of the codes cluster together semantically? You know, are people using similar words or phrases and so on? Or are they categorizing things in a similar way? This is a really good way of approaching your data. So what kind of categories are people constructing? For example, are they talking about people as good or as bad, and so on. We can also check for latent clustering. So do some of our codes connect to some underpinning ideas? Are people drawing on similar assumptions, say around gender or femininity or masculinity? And do these assumptions help us understand how people are thinking about particular issues? You know, you kind of get why someone's saying something when you understand the assumptions that they're working off.
You can read my mind, I can read yours.
So there's some real practicalities to organizing your data, and thematic analysis is quite a major organizational task. Really, it's all about organizing your data. And once you have your themes, you want to map them in some way, because you need to know if your analysis actually works. Does it really help us make sense of our data? So we need to be able to fit our themes or our codes, our raw data together and make sure that our analysis is threading it all nicely together. We also need to show how our themes are distinct from each other, but also how they relate to each other. Now, there are a few different ways you can do this, and you can use a table, and I've included one on our Moodle site as an example of this. The table was made by Daniel Every, and there's also a table in our textbook as well. You can also use a thematic map, which you'll see in the next slide. And you can also just use pieces of paper or sticky notes. So, you know, you put your codes on these pieces of paper, move them around into clusters on a board. And this can be a good way of finding themes. You know, it's all down to personal preference, really. Whatever works best for you. You can also start to use mind maps. Now, finally, the last image from our logo is explained. The mind map. This is just a way of organizing ideas. In this instance, someone else's ideas. So you can use them to organize your codes in ways that help you identify themes. Now, I have a video of Danielle Every doing her analysis on our body art focus group transcript, so go have a watch of that. I've called it a supplement video for Lecture 6. And Danielle is the brains behind this unit, so she's worth listening to. She did most of the work in putting this unit together. She was running this unit last year, so I've got a big thank you to say to Danielle. You'll see thank you on all of our PowerPoint slides. So she did a lot of work on this unit, so we've got a lot to thank her for. So have a look at that video. Yeah. So after you watch that video, you'll see how Danielle has identified a number of themes. Here's another way she's represented what she's found. This represents that early stage of starting to put forward a theme to see if it makes sense. You know, it's a visual map which shows a main theme, which is all about how times have changed. That's being proposed as the central organizing concept. And we've got different ways that people talked about how times have changed. And the other theme, only a little and only for some, which is all about how people's identities are impacted by tattoos. Now, all of that will make sense. There's a plane flying over. Just bear with me. Oh, quiet rural Townsville, hey? Okay, it's gone. Now, so all of this will make sense once you've seen Danielle's video. Now, our next phase is quality assurance, where we review our themes. This phase, again, relies on reflection and, once again, a deep level of engagement with the data. So we can ask ourselves particular questions when reviewing our themes. Number one, are the codes under each theme, do the codes under each theme relate to the central organizing concept of the theme? Do those codes fit that central concept? If there's a mismatch between your raw data and your theme, that indicates a poor quality analysis. Number two, do the candidate themes encompass most of the code? So if you go back to your coding, have you missed large sections of codes? Now that might be okay. Those codes that don't fit into any of your themes might just reflect those parts of your data where you went off topic. But you need to check that you're happy that some codes are not being represented in your themes. And if you find that there are important codes that don't fit into any of your themes, that indicates that your analysis might be incomplete. Now you also need to check that you've stuck close to your data at this stage. Make sure your themes haven't gone too far away from your data. Number three, are the themes distinct from each other, or are there significant overlaps? So if one code sits under several themes, those themes might be too blurry. they might overlap too much, not be distinct enough. So that might be a sign that you've got to go back and rethink your themes. Number 4, do the themes actually address your research question? Here you might have to tweak your research question. Your research question might have been off target to begin with. So you just retweet your research question. I know, what madness. It sounds crazy, doesn't it? It's like you've run your experiment, you decided your experiment's gone wrong, so you retweak your hypothesis to get your data to fit your hypothesis. Sounds fraudulent, doesn't it? But it's not in qualitative research because we have that flexibility. This is one of the real joys of qualitative research, that halfway through your research, if you realize you've made a mistake, you can make changes. You're not stuck to a systematic procedure that you've got to follow. You don't have to go all the way back to step 1. Because remember, we've got phases in qualitative research. It's iterative. We can go from stage or phase 1 straight to phase 4, or we go from phase 4 back to phase 2, and so on. So we're able to go backwards and forwards. It's a great thing about qualitative research. It's so flexible that you can change your research question after you've conducted your data analysis, because you might have realized, oh, I asked the wrong question. And now when I'm listening to people, it's clear what the real question really is. And it's okay. You can then change your research question to reflect that. It can go in reverse. Your participants can actually inform the question that you came up with at the start. Okay. So that's enough confusion for you. That's enough for this week. So what I'd like you to do is go back to that body art focus group transcript, practice your coding, have a go at developing some themes, and I want you to do that in preparation for next week, week 10, where you've got the final lecture. Final lecture, where we're going to look at we're going to look at analysis and how we can get into more in-depth analysis, really have a look at those themes and shoring up those themes. So it'd be great if you get that practice with the transcript. Have a go at that so that week 10's lecture makes sense to you. That's lecture number 7. But we're also preparing for our final tutorial. Oh my God, we're coming to the end, aren't we? So our final tutorial, which is in week 11, where I'd like us to get together and for you to share your analysis of that focus group transcript, so you can get a sense of how your meaning making might be the same or different from your classmates. So, week 10 coming up. So next lecture is lecture 7. So till then, ta-da.